Welcome to the In Love with PMDD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Rose, your PMDD relationship psychotraumatologist, and I help you stop the monthly PMDD breakups. PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It is in approximately 1 in 5 women, and it makes you want to break up with your partner approximately 1 to 2 weeks before your period every single month. So as someone who has suffered with PMDD for over 18 years, I dedicated my doctorate practice to helping partners navigate those monthly PMDD breakups with everything from attachment styles, triggers, sensitivity to noise, sensitivity to touch, all of the things that you really struggle with when you're in PMDD. And I also dedicated my dissertation to a phenomenological study of the relationship experiences of partners of individuals who suffer with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So I'm not just here to help the sufferer, the one who is suffering with PMDD. I am here for the partners as well. So if you need those private sessions, make sure you go to inlovewithpmdd.com and get those tools. So let's get into this week's PMDD trauma transformational tools that is going to help you stop the monthly breakups and stop the suffering and stress in your PMDD relationship. Let's get into it.
45.
Today we are going to be talking about trusting yourself in PMDD. I am back with Amy.
Hey.
And we were just having a conversation, and we're just going to continue it here to give you some tools and really some insight on when you're in the dating process, how hard it is to trust yourself when you have PMDD. Trust your gut, trust your instinct, trust the responses that you want to have when you've been triggered by someone that you're dating. And there's almost this lack of reassurance that you immediately have because you start to question yourself and say, should I be triggered about this thing that this person did? Am I overreacting? Am I being overly sensitive? Do I have rejection sensitivity? Are they going to think I'm crazy if I bring this up? Are they going to think like, what's wrong with you? Are they going to gaslight me and say that I'm making a big deal over nothing when it really is a big deal? I've been here so many times, and the first thing that I would say is I have to have what I call a moral compass, and that is someone, some entity to work this out with, to question it, to really go through it. Because earlier in my journey, I used to just react and I didn't have a moral compass. And I used to just, oh, this is not right. And I would go off, and then I would be embarrassed, and then I would be ashamed, and then I would feel guilty. But in the moment, I felt completely justified because I felt offended. And when you're in that moment of offense, when you're in PMDD, because like me and Amy were just talking about, we feel things so deeply that the hurtful words for me, it's just the biggest thing when someone just says hurtful words for some reason. I know people that their partner or someone that they're dating can say hurtful words and they can just brush it off and it's no big deal. But for me, it's almost like twisting a knife, like you're physically hurting me when you're saying these hurtful words. And it's really hard when the person you're dating or the person that you're with and even friends are like, what's the big deal? Like get over it, or that's how they are. And you're like, no, this doesn't feel right. Like this is not okay. So you feel a little bit alone in that journey of really processing everything that you're dealing with. And you start to question, is it just me? Can I trust myself?
Yeah, that's it. It's such a big thing. And I think for me, when it comes to it is the words, but it's the undertone of it. It's the
Mm,
energy behind it all. When something happens, if it's with a certain person that it happens with, or a different person, it's like you can feel the energy behind something. And I think that is the thing underneath that we can struggle with trusting. If something
mm,
happens with someone, and even if I remember once I went out for coffee with a woman, and the whole time I was with this woman, it's like she didn't actually do anything. We was having normal conversations, but the whole time I felt really anxious. I felt
mm,
really small. I felt unable to be myself. And I left and I remember just really crying and just being like, I just felt awful this whole time. And she didn't do anything. She didn't actually do anything, but the energy behind it all just I felt undermined. I felt not in a great place in this situation. And I think one of the things that I've learned over the years when it comes to trusting myself is knowing my own space, knowing who I am in myself. And the more that I'm in that place of knowing who Amy is, what's Amy's piece, and really like starting to protect that space, then when I'm around people, I know if I feel safe or not. There's kind of taking it outside of relationships for the moment and just into kind of normal settings. I know how I am because if I'm in a situation and I feel able to just communicate like in any way I want to and just be myself, be silly, be happy, whatever, then I'm okay. Then I'm like, oh, this situation I feel quite safe in. When I start to shrink and I start to realize like I don't feel like I can say things, I feel a little bit uneasy here. They're the kind of dynamics that I step away from when it comes to kind of friendships and family members or whatever. But when it comes to romantic relationships, there is another layer as well because one, romantic relationships kind of transfer us from our parent relationships as adults. So there's a lot more to it. There's almost like there's a lot more internally that we feel like we're putting on the line as
Hmm.
we go into them relationships, but also we can have blinkers on our eyes a lot of the time. So we can be in relationships where in reality the relationship ain't that great, but in your mind and in your fantasy it's
Mm.
and that kind of it's that saying of don't look at how you feel about someone, look at how they actually make you feel, and that generally tends to but it's hard because then we do have times as well where, and I've been through this plenty of times, where we think someone is a good, I don't want to say good person because people we make good and bad
Yeah,
decisions, but
yeah.
we think someone's got pure intent
Hmm.
and they don't, and that one can be a challenge
Yeah.
because that one is where layers of betrayal I think start to come in when you're like, oh, I thought your intentions were good, but they weren't, and that's where emotional deposit comes in, and where that first step of doing the work on yourself and realizing and really realizing this, not having it up here but really in your heart that you are important. I am important, my peace is important, my time is important, I am precious, and I have to protect myself. And that can be very hard because I think a lot of us with PMDD we are highly sensitive people, a lot of us. And I think the nuance of that, in my personal opinion, is that we're actually very pure people, and we really, deep down, we really want to believe that people are good. And so by that as a definition, it can make us naive sometimes. It can make us, want to just be open, honest, and forthcoming when unfortunately we don't always live in a world where we can do that. And that can be a very painful experience for us because it's hard for us to bear that that is actually the truth.
Yeah, I am guilty of the majority of what you just said. I romanticize, fantasize relationships. And so I think when I do that, because I've seen a pattern of this and I had to just really be honest with myself, because the only times that I've ever been able to walk away from relationships has been when I've taken myself out of the fantasy and the reality has literally smacked me in the face. It's almost like you can't sugarcoat this. You can't paint a canvas over this. It's almost like a tattoo and I just keep doing a cover up. Like the tattoo sucks, but I'm like keep going over it. Like, no, let's just put a big rose on it and let's just paint it really dark and let's just make it beautiful. And you do that, and then there's another dose of reality. They do something, they say something, and I'm like, no, 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 I could cover that up too. And so it's like my job is literally just continuing
Yeah.
to live in this fantasy. And that's why I say it's so important to have this moral compass of someone else from the outside looking in, because they literally smack me with reality and they're like, Rose, babe, did you not just hear what they said? But didn't they just do this to you? Or didn't they just, and so what I do is I really start to get really protective about partners. I really start to get protective about
Yeah.
people telling me the reality of what they are. And I'm like, no, I start making excuses for them and I start all of these things. And they're like, so people who are your friends, they want to support you. They're like, okay, like if you're happy. And so I used to pretend like I was happy just so they would support me in the canvas that I was painting when they're really like, and so then when we break up, they're kind of like, yeah, because that was like, I tried to tell you, but you didn't want to see it. And I think a lot of times when we're in PMDD and when you have PMDD, you almost feel the need to live in a fantasy land because I remember that I used to just be grateful that I had partners that if we got in a big blow up and we got in a fight and we got in an argument, they would wake up the next day and pretend like nothing happened. And I used to think that was a positive quality because I used to say, wow, they're not holding me accountable for anything that happens. Like this must be the one. Cause like who else is gonna put up with this? Like I'm like, this is a beautiful quality
Yeah.
for someone who has PMDD because you're never gonna be held accountable for your actions because they're just gonna pretend like it didn't happen. Well, that was fine when it was on my part, but then when they did stuff and pretended that it didn't happen and I was gaslit, I'm like, well, this doesn't feel good.
Mm.
No, I'm like, no, this really happened. Like that quality was not the best. And so
Yeah.
I'm living in the land of fantasy is something that a lot of PMDD partners tend to do because facing the reality of their problems, of their issues, of their struggles, probably would make them question whether they should be in the relationship. And people don't want to face that. They don't want to, they're just like, "Hey, you're in your follicular days. Let's just wait till you get to your follicular days and we'll just pretend like it never happened." They just want to
Mm.
live for the follicular days. They want to ignore the
Yeah.
luteal as if it didn't happen, and then sometimes even ovulation and menstruation, and they just want to live for that 1 week in the month where everything is glorious and there's sunshine and rainbows, and it's not sustainable, is what I learned. It's not sustainable. You can't live off of 1 good week a month and ignore the reality of 3 weeks of hell.
Yeah, no, you can't. And it reminds me just that last bit there before, because there was so much good stuff in what you just said. But that last bit, it really reminds me of like as like an avid kind of exerciser, and I'm quite into, learning about like the Stoic philosophy as well. And one of the big things there is that life there is this illusion nowadays that life is meant to be easy, that it's meant to be, rainbows and sunshine and everything's okay. And fundamentally, life is just genuinely hard. But it's when we can detach and we can just show up in life in its moment and do the best that we can with ourselves, that's when it becomes easier as a woman to actually be present with yourself in all of these phases, because once you come to that place where you have a genuine deep rooted self-care, self-protection, like this is my pace and I'm protecting it, then doing things that are good for you for your cycle become easier outside of the scope of a relationship. Just for you, it's like, no, I'm going to exercise because I know that makes me feel good. No, I'm going to eat this food because I know it makes me feel good. No, today I'm going to eat some chocolate, but I know that right now I need that and that will be okay. And there's no guilt coming from that. It's not I'm doing everything perfectly. It's I'm doing what I know is going to bring me my internal peace, because the deposit of internal peace is what I really need right now. And that helps me move through these emotions. But I think like one thing that came up when you was talking about the fantasy, and I really love that honesty as well, of like that, talking to your friend and actually lie. Like I was in that. I was in a very, toxic and abusive relationship when I was younger. And, I would go for weeks of not speaking to my friend. And then I'd call
Yeah.
her and like, I'd just drop his name in and she's like, oh, so you're back with him. I'm like, yeah, 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 we're back. Yeah, of course. And it's like, it's just, but that I think over the time, one of the, because, like the premise of this is that trust in yourself. But I think that if you imagine it like that slow drop of water, and what's happened is the choices that we've made over the years, And also, we talk about other people gaslighting us, but we gaslight ourselves in the
Mhm.
fantasy.
Mhm.
Years I gaslighted myself with my ex-boyfriend, like years. Oh, one day it would change. One day we'll live a perfect life. One day, like,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
like it's just. But what happens is it erodes the soul, and it erodes the trust inside of ourselves and our self-esteem and our self-respect in it, and it just starts going down and down and down. And I think that is where then when we kind of move into new situations, we have lost trust in ourselves. So when we come into these moments where, as we're saying, like, is this behavior okay? Is it, because there was this one time with this guy where, like, he came to this cafe where I was actually, and he didn't speak to me, and I was kind of shocked that he was there and I didn't speak to him. And he said to me, he was like, "Oh, do you think he was rude to me tonight?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, maybe I was." And then as time went on, I was like, "Hold on a minute, you didn't speak to me either. This is mutual." But in them moments, because of the way people do things, we can, and because of our craving, like, we have to also fundamentally remember that we crave love. We want love so much, and that's such a innate human desire that it sometimes it bypasses the other stuff, and then we feel guilty because it's like, why did I not follow my values? Why did I not, trust myself? Why did I not? And that's where, like, the investment of the emotional deposit comes in, and being able to stand back, having not just tools within yourself, but as you said, like a person, if you have a relationship with God, like probably a bit of both, because I think we do have like blind spots as well.
Mhm.
People that you can call and just be like, okay, like, this has happened, this is how I feel. Am I blowing this out of proportion? Because and maybe in context, there's an element that you may be blowing it out of proportion, but when you allow the emotions to subside, it still may be that the emotions are valid. It's just they're triggered from past experiences too. And that, I
Yeah.
think, is a very important thing for us with PMDD to remember, that because we have a lot of kind of trauma, it and this was a big thing actually for me in my relationship with my ex-boyfriend. Like, time is really valuable for me, and he was always like hours. Like, he would say he was
Oh,
10 and he would come at 9, and it's not that he was late that was always the issue, it's that he knew it upset me, and he didn't even let me know. And then I would get really upset. We would get into this argument, and I was young, I wasn't healed. We was both in this spiral. I should have left it. Like, fundamentally, now as a woman with self-respect, I would have just gone, "No, you're not worth it. You don't value me. This isn't going anywhere." But in that time, my need for love was so much more desperate that I couldn't control that. It was like, I need this person, and he knew that. So I would try and explain it to him, and he would manipulate it. And he would, because I had struggled with emotional regulation, he would wind me up to a point of emotional explosion. And then I would apologize. And we would go round and round in this cycle. And this happens so often because we have these emotions that are so intense. We blow things out of proportion, quote unquote, and then we feel guilty because in context it isn't proportional, but it doesn't mean it's not valid. And that's, I think, the bit that we really need to focus on. Yes, maybe we shouldn't be having a fit of rage because they've done this small thing, but it doesn't mean that what they've done isn't it doesn't mean what they've done is okay. It just means that we need to work on that emotional regulation. But what happens, I'm not saying in all relationships, but in toxic relationships, what happens is that is then used as ammunition to manipulate, undermine, gaslight, blame you, so then you go into the place of feeling guilty, and then you're in their control.
yeah. I think that reminds me because you mentioned the time thing, and I know everybody has their certain things that are important to them. And I think sometimes when I'm working with clients, I have to remember, if they're explaining to me something and there's two of them, someone that they're dating, and I don't necessarily have the same values and a sense of what would make me tick. Like I always say, know what makes you tick. Like if time is your thing, time management is your thing. If someone's late for me, I don't feel disrespected. I just make up a story in my mind of whatever makes me feel good about them being late. I will internally be like, oh, they just had to like feed their dog and pet them 5 times. Like I do that. I'm used to doing that. That's like a trait. I don't know if it's toxic or not, but I internally, so by the time they're late, like I'm still pretending like they're not late because so there's no issue. Whereas, I know some people, if they're late, it's like a form of disrespect. It's like you don't respect or value my time. So I'm going to give you an example. This client brought this to me and I was just like, oh, I really wish I was a person that really was like really big on time because then I could advise them because they were asking me one of those questions like, am I overreacting? Like, is this wrong? And so let me tell you what happened. So quick story time. So they were dating for a couple months, and this client said that the guy was going to take her away on like an overnight. They were going to go. They were feeling good about each other, had a really good connection, and he was like, "Oh, I'm going to take you on an overnight trip." So he said originally he's going to pick her up at 8 o'clock, 8 p.m. that evening. So she plans for the. She has PMDD. She's in PMDD at the time. And so she plans all this other stuff to do for the day. And then at around noon, he texts her and was like, "Hey, I'm actually able to pick you up earlier, if that's okay with you," like and stuff like that. So then she's like, "Okay, well, just let me know the new time," and then so she could adjust her schedule. Well, right after they have that text conversation, she doesn't hear anything from him. So all day long, she's like anxious, like, well, what's the new time? So she's like, do I need to move things around? Like, I don't understand the new time. Like, what do I do? So she's really anxious on a high alert because, when you have anxiety, like in PMDD, you're just like, what do I do? What do I do? Do I not do this? Do I do the next thing? And so then she proceeds to do all these other things. And then 4 hours later, he texted and was like, "Oh, it's no big deal. Like, no need to rush." Kind of like a gaslighting thing, almost like making it seem like it was no big deal. "Oh, no, no big deal. I just meant I was going to be available at 7 instead of 8." So then she messages me again. She's like, "Am I all of this for 1 hour? Like I thought, she was like, I thought he was gonna pick me up at 3 or 4, and so she was saying, like, was it realistic to be triggered by the fact that he had like stopped texting her for 3 or 4 hours and left her pretty much hanging, but she was trying not to like nag him. And because when you're in PMDD, you have that anxious energy, you really like a person, you don't want to like blow up their text messages, but you have to like message someone. So she was emailing me and
Mm.
like what should I do, because I'm feeling anxious, like I want. So then she responds, it's like, okay, okay, babe, like I'll see you at 8 or whatever. Oh, she said no, she said okay, babe. So then she goes home and she starts getting ready for 8 o'clock, and then 8 o'clock runs around, and then he texts her and said, "What time would you like me to pick you up, sweetheart?" And she's like, what? Like I pretty much like I think so she's like, I thought it was 8, like now it's like going, so now it's like she feels like she's going crazy. So she's like, I'll be ready in 20 minutes or whatever. So she stopped like rushing because she had packed her overnight bag, and she stopped rushing because he had not even left. And so she's like, okay, so now he's coming, like whatever. So anyway, so she gets her stuff together, and then he texts that he's there. And so when he texts that he's there, she just was doing like other things around the house or whatever. She said I was probably only like 15 minutes like after he said I'm here, because he had parked in like the parking spot or whatever. And so she didn't think anything of it. So she gets in the car, she puts her bag in the back, and she gets in the car, and she says she was just happy to see him and willing to like literally overlook the whole misunderstanding. And he's like, and then so she gets in the car, and then he's like, "So what happened?" And she's like, what do you mean?" And so he's like, I really didn't appreciate waiting for you for 15 minutes. And she's like, "What?" So she's so he so this whole day, she's like thinking, like, is it me? Like, she's still feeling like, is this a joke? Like, am I being punked? Like Ashton Kutcher, like, are the cameras on? Because he's like literally pissed off, like literally, like, and so she's like, Oh, I was so she tries to she told me she said it was like that fork in the road for her. She was like, I could either go off on PMDD rage and be like, but she said I was trying to preserve it because they were doing an overnight trip and they had to drive like an hour away to go to this staycation or whatever. So she said his love language was because I always say, what is the person's love language and stuff, because that will help soothe them if you're ever in a
Mm,
position where either one of them triggered. So she knew his love language was physical touch. So she starts to hold his hand and she does what you said. She starts to apologize to him she
mm,
was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was late." Meanwhile, reality, you were late because you were getting confused with all these timelines. So she starts to apologize to him, thinking that it's going to fix the situation. Like, "Oh, I'm so
mm.
sorry, babe." And so now he's acting as the authoritarian, like he's acting like she's
Yeah.
the child and like he's that, like scolding her. And she's like, knowing that he's wrong, but still taking it because she's like, maybe this is just my PMDD. So she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, babe." Like, so she's over explaining herself, which is a lot of what we do when we're in PMDD. We're like talking all these things. I was doing this and I was doing this and I was doing, and so she thought she was taking the high road and, it was going to be fine. So they have to drive like an hour away. So they get 45 minutes into the trip and have like another, like, I think it was like 30 minutes, she said. So she's holding his hand and, she's telling him, like, I'm sorry about this. And so then he says, "So how was your day?" So she thought he had like let it go because she's like, "Okay, I did a good job. Like I consoled him, all these things." So she starts talking about her day and she's in PMDD. So she gets a little bit like teary eyed because now she's been filled with anxiety, when you get that rush of it. So she was like, "I just had a really hard day, blah 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 blah." And then you're not gonna believe this. He pulls over to the side of the road, dark at night. And so he goes to look at her, she says, and he's like, so looking like he's concerned about her day. And so she starts to get more emotional, like, "Oh, he really cares about my day." So she's telling him more about the day, like, "Yeah, it was just really hard for me. I had a lot going on." And do you know what he does?
He
He
gets out of
starts
his car to go to the toilet.
No, he reaches over to his dashboard and starts to change the address in the GPS. And he says to her, "It really doesn't seem like you're in the state to have to go on this trip. Maybe we should do this another time."
Oh, what an ass.
Because, but,
Oh,
but she was in tears at that time. And then she was a little bit confused. This is where the gaslighting comes in because now she's like, "Wait, did I do this?" So then he turns the car around on this dark road because you have to think it's like 9 o'clock at this time. They had already driven like 45 minutes. He turns the car around and starts driving back towards her house. And so she literally begs him and she says, "I we can still have a relax," because he said this was supposed to be a relaxing trip and it just doesn't seem like you're in the right state of mind to
uh,
go on this trip.
yeah.
And so she says, because I said, "What did you say?" And she says, she asked him, practically begged him, "Can we at least try?" For me, in my like if someone said that to me, even if whatever I'm taking them home, if they told me, like, "Can we," like, I would not be able to just not try because the person is literally saying, like, "Can we just try to have a good time," or whatever. And he still kept driving. And she said that they had music on the way there, and when he turned around the music was off, they were in silence, and he was driving like a bat out of hell, like speeding to take her back, and like she had done something wrong. So that he gets to the house and I was like, "Well, did he get out and like give you a hug or like say when you're going to talk again?" She said, "He didn't speak to me. I went to get my bag out of the back of the car and I closed the door and he sped off, like where you can hear the tire screech." And so she was left in like self-loathing all evening long, thinking she had done something wrong. This is where you can't trust, like, can I trust myself in PMDD? Like, was it me? Did I ruin it? Was it my fault? And so she's messaging me and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And then the next day he texts her in the morning and was like, "Good morning. Would you like to chat? Like for a coffee or something?" And so she's like, "So that this is what I mean by do you trust yourself?" She's like, So do I go to the car? So I'm going to ask you. I gave her advice, but I'm going to ask you. If this was your client and then you talk to them all the way through, like they're messaging you, and then the next day the person messages and is like, let's go for a coffee and chat. Like pretty much to talk about what happened when they were supposed to be in the other place. Like what would you like advise?
Well, I think firstly, I would find it very hard to not be firm, but fundamentally it's their choice. But if
Hmm.
I was to advise it, I definitely wouldn't advise to go then, because one, it's way too fresh, and you're still, because to me, if that's the fullness of the actual of the context of the situation, that is just an extremely gaslighting situation where
Hmm.
your emotions are being played like a puppet, and you're still very charged in the morning, probably quite tired as well because you've not slept, so you're even more vulnerable. So I would definitely, I would say that would be a solid no. Like, this guy is a confuser,
Yeah.
100%, and probably a bit of an abuser as well, at least emotionally. You don't really want to tar someone with that brush, but like, from the context of that, like, the whole thing is just like a swirling pool of confusion, and drawing someone, and as well as anything, because really, I'm not saying this in any discrediting way to your client, but I think when someone gets to that point where they're so sure of themselves, I think that they would get to that point where it's like, fine, just take me home, like, F you, if
Hmm.
you're like that. But I think when we do have a lot of them triggers inside, like, people like that very much play on that. They play on the
Mm.
fact that, this, you should probably go home now, like, this isn't good for you. And it's like, what? Hold on a minute, you're asking me about my day. I'm telling you I had an emotional day and you want to take me home. What? This is, but that again comes back to that sense of trust, and deep rooted foundation of, this is who I am. Because I think with people who do gaslight, with very, it's hard that the narcissistic word is thrown around so much now, but with people who are like that, they do make you look at the sky and be like,
Hmm.
I'm actually not sure anymore if the sky
Yeah.
is blue, maybe
Yeah.
it is green. And this is where I think, when we have been through them sorts of things so much in our lives, it's like we have to become so firm in who we are that we can cut through it. And that's where, again, it's like, it's about us turning back to ourselves and being like, no, this isn't right, this isn't how I feel right now, this is who I am, this is how I should be treated in the context of this situation. And it's not, I think again, it's clear communication, isn't it? When, like, it's like, it goes into a sense of, like, the word that's coming up in my mind is witchcraft. And I know
Hmm.
it sounds like a really big
No, go
word, but
ahead. Go with it. Yeah.
it's almost like, no one can see my hands doing this, but it's like putting a spell on someone. It's
Yeah.
twisting you up. It's like, all of a sudden you're in this mist and you're like, what am I? Who am I? Am I
Yes.
really a person? Is this real? And but in clear communication with someone who is like, whether someone could be, quite frankly, an asshole, but they can still make you feel clear. It's like, oh,
Hmm.
this guy
Yeah.
is just very nice. But when someone does that, and you're literally in this place where you're swirling, it's like they're putting a spell on you.
Yeah.
It's like they're actually going, no, are you sure? Are you sure that's what I said? Are you sure that's how you feel? Maybe that's, and they're like twisting. It's like they're twisting things up inside of you, so that your client goes home and she's like completely
Yeah.
discombobulated. It's like,
Yeah.
what? Who? What? Was it me? Was it them? Was it who is it? And but there's so much going on that you can't even figure out what is going on. And I think, in all honesty, in that situation, run, block, duck, hide.
And it was so hard
Get away.
because one thing, because I said, well, did you ever, because I asked her, I said, well, did you ever explain to him how confused you were about the whole timeline? She said when she was in the car and they were driving back, she was saying, I wouldn't have never been late had you not confused me with the time earlier and you didn't text message me. So then she was pretty much now laying out everything that happened. Like we were texting, we were having a good conversation. You stopped responding to me for 4 hours. I didn't know what was going on. It made me anxious, all the things. And do you know what he said to her? He said he calm, but again, this is where the narcissistic is because they're calm when you're like getting
Yeah,
erratic. And then
because they get it.
he said, did that annoy you? And I said,
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
yeah.
Like
And it's
he
so
knew
it
what
is
he
so
was doing.
calm as
He
well.
knew what he
Yeah,
was doing to
yeah,
trigger her and leave her
yeah.
in that state so that he could pick her up in that state. And then when she reacted to it, be like,
Mm,
oh, like what's wrong with
mm.
you kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's so hard, isn't it? Like I've definitely not the exact same context, but it's very relatable to a lot of the experiences I had with my ex-partner. And he and it was a very like it makes you want to rip your hair out that you're so like frustrated with their calmness, but they
Oh,
feed off of your distress. And
yes.
that's the point. That and I think because even in your emotion, like there's an element of purity in, I'm not saying that we're all angels, I've done some bad things in my life too. But like in the sense of like you want to wear your heart on your sleeve, you want to be an honest person. So you can't like in that context, there's a sense of like, what's the point in this? What but the point isn't for the moment. The point is insidious. The point is about eroding someone over time. It's about eroding their confidence, questioning their reality. And that, like for myself in that relationship, it took me a long time to come back to the sky is blue, the grass is green,
Yeah.
outside, because they hook you. These relationships are they're so insidious because they really go so far into the soul that everything about your own psyche, like before I met my ex-boyfriend, I was much more confident. I had my traumas, I had my pains, but I was much more confident, outgoing. Like by the time I ended that relationship, I'd lost loads of friends, I was barely going out, I questioned I was afraid of
Yeah.
everything. I was so scared. He put the fear of the devil inside of me. It was just eroding every part of me. But there was such, what they also do is create that sense of that you need them.
Yes.
You need them in this situation because you're not stable. That client, she's not stable. Like, are you sure? Are you, like questioning everything about yourself. And I think that is such a hard thing because then when it does come to the next, which kind of goes into what we was talking about before, that eroding, it's like when you next get into relationships, there's so much underneath that needs to be healed, that
Mm,
until you really heal it and become firm in who you are again, it's really hard to get into new situations because you you've been taken from so much. And them like we do now live, there's a lot out there that says about, we are in a very narcissistic society now. We're
hmm.
in a very self-indulgent, egocentric society. So most people, not most people, but there are a lot of narcissistic people out there. And I
Yeah.
think that it is so much about, your client really done a good thing in that situation, being able to message you the whole time, questioning it all was such a good thing. Because imagine if she didn't,
Yeah.
she because it's so hard. Like the games are so, like, it's witchcraft. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's real. I put a spell on you situation. Like, this isn't stuff to kind of joke around with. It gets right into the psyche, and they choose people that they can, find that can. And I'm not saying it in any horrible way. I've been a victim of it myself. Like, but they choose people that have that sense of innocence and vulnerability in that way,
Yes.
because then they can twist it, they can just turn you on, and and the worst part is that they get you to that point where you do explode, so then you feel horrendously guilty and you can't
Exactly.
stop coming back because the guilt overrides the need to leave, because now you're blaming yourself.
Exactly. And that's what she did because The thing about narcissists is they reveal themselves over time, but the
Yeah.
persona that they present in the beginning is completely separate from who they truly are. So, a lot of times, what you connect to is that initial persona of this amazing person who mirrors you, who mirrors what you like to do. You're so connected, like all the things. And so, when she went to let him go, when you talked about healing, which is a lot of what you have to do when you come out of these traumatic situations, she still hooked to that representative in the beginning, that other side of him. And so it's harder for her, but like we had to go no contact with this person. And it was so hard for her because she was still remembering the plans and the dreams and the fantasies and all these things that she was
Yeah.
imagining, especially when you're dating and you have PMDD and you tell
Mm,
the person you have PMDD and they act like they can handle it and all these things. You're like, oh, I finally found a person, and then the
mm,
person shows themselves, reveals themselves in a glimpse. But then
yeah.
they go the next morning and they're like, hey, love, would you like to chat? And it's like, maybe they're back. Maybe I should go to, like, maybe this was just a one-time thing. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's no big deal that we didn't go on the trip. Maybe I should just go for coffee. And I feel
Mm,
like had she gone for coffee, they would have been like a fish, like I got one. Once they see
oh,
that they could do that to you and you come back the next morning and pretend
mm,
like nothing happened, which is what narcissists love to do, then they know that they got you.
mm. Yeah, yeah. It's so true. It's so sad, but I so relate to that bit as well. There was such because they do and I think this goes back to what I was talking about with that art of seduction
Hmm.
as well. That as women, it is really important for us to hold our cards close in a lot of ways. Like, don't tell a man your fantasy. No, we're not talking about sexual fantasies here. We're talking about a genuine fantasy. Like, that well, with my ex-boyfriend, it was always this thing of one day we'll travel together, one day we'll do all these things.
Yeah.
And you get hooked onto it. It's like, oh, it's like this now, but one day, for one day.
Yeah.
And you live in the fantasy because we as women do that. We do, and we get hooked in by sweet little lies. Like men get seduced by visuals, women get seduced by words.
Hmm.
When a man tells you sweet little words, oh yeah, I will be your Prince Charming. I want to protect you. Don't listen to the words, listen to his actions. See his actions and then listen to the words as well. Like if he's treating, because I was saying this yesterday as well, if he's treating you like a girlfriend, but he's saying he doesn't want to commit, listen to that too.
Yeah.
But also listen to the other way. If he's telling you, oh, it will be like this, it will be like this, but you're feeling he makes me feel inadequate. He makes me feel that listen to yourself because, and also, there was not just then, like they were saying something earlier about about the timing thing, and is that okay that he kind of
Hmm.
done that? And I think one thing to also remember is like, as you said, it doesn't really bother you, and it bothers me. So there might be a person out there that wouldn't be good for me because I just couldn't stand that. But
Exactly.
it would be good for you because it doesn't bother you. Like I have one of my best friends is if we say we're going to meet at 7 o'clock, she'll come at 9. But we've been friends for so long that it gets to the point where it's like, look, this is who she is. And that's okay. Like it's not a disrespect thing, but like in the context of a romantic relationship, that is not what I want. I'm a
Yeah.
very industrious person. Even some of my
Yeah.
clients have said it to me before. Like, you come in a minute later,
Yeah.
hello.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's who I am, and I've learned to accept it. Like I'm an on time kind of girl, and I don't want to be with someone who, if they're 10 minutes late or whatever, and they message me, it is what it is. But fundamentally speaking, that's kind of value that I have within myself, and it's not what I want in a partner.
Yeah.
So, but that is also nuances of what we need to understand about ourselves as well, like what we're willing to put up with and what we're not. And I think we really have to notice early on as well. Like, if we say we're willing to put up with this now, maybe we are because we're still in the high oxytocin phase. We're still a little bit, in that lovey-dovey phase. But are we going to want to put up with that in 2, 3, 4 years' time?
Because people don't
Really?
really change. Those kind of qualities It's just
No.
more of the same. I've seen some of the breakups that I've seen with PMDD partners where the thing that triggered them in the beginning is the reason why it ended in the end. And it
Yeah.
was years later. It's the same thing in the beginning that you automatically were like, I don't like this. But you just there were all these other qualities and all, and it's almost like this scarcity mindset that we talked about on the other episode. You're like,
Yeah.
well, they have all these other qualities, so I'm just gonna accept these things that you know make you tick.
Yeah, and I think that there are three really foundational things that people need to think of within themselves. One is the scarcity mindset that you have to start realizing that life is full of abundance. There are plenty more fish in the sea. There will be someone that will come. You know, you found so you didn't think that you'd find this person and you found this person. So there will be
Right.
someone else. The other is the fact of I know this I know this may sound a bit of a somber and strange thing, but from like a meditation kind of perspective, like the pondering of the fact that life isn't eternal in this world, in this
Yeah.
material world, it is very important. Like time is precious. Your time is precious. Your emotions are precious. Your peace is precious.
Hmm.
Don't waste it on someone just because that is a lot of what it ends up coming down to, especially as women, especially as women. Men do not have this because they don't have a time frame. We have a time frame, and that does trigger us. That does make us become more desperate. It does. And we can sit and we can watch the Instagram videos and say, this is the time for me or whatever. But I'm sorry, even for myself, I'm a 30-year-old woman. I want to have kids. Like it does come into my mind. I have many clients that it comes into their mind as well. And especially because PMDD is a cyclical thing, there's a
Yeah.
lot of people, it can be triggered more from having kids as well. There's a lot around the context of motherhood that makes relationships feel more desperate and makes us settle. But because again, it comes back to that scarcity mindset that we don't think that there is enough. And that is where we really need to go deep inside of ourselves and search into the deep of our core and our psyche, and where does this belief really come from? Yes, maybe it's past trauma, but actually not necessarily. It could also just be the fundamentals of the I can't think of the word now, the philosophical way that we've been brought up, that we
Yeah.
need to go and get. We have to go and get. And that mentality in and of itself and the psychology of marketing and stuff always comes from a place of lack.
Yep.
Is we have to get the next best thing. And because we have to get the next best thing, it must be because there's a sense of lack. So we're always in this rat race of lack. And we have to really step back and be like, do I really believe that? Because when let's go back to nature for a moment and look at the simplicity of the birds, where it says in the Bible, that God feeds them. Your heavenly father feeds them. It's like maybe you don't believe in the biblical sense of that, but when you really look at nature, do you ever see that it's lacking? Do you
Yeah.
see that the trees don't grow? And that's the thing. Like, if we can strip our minds of social constructs that we've been brought up in, and we can come back to the simplicity of nature and realize life is abundant. It's full of abundance, and we've been programmed to believe that we're lacking. And so, as women, when we get to this certain age, we settle, and then we look at them triggers and it's like, oh, okay, maybe he's a bit lazy, or maybe he's a bit this, or maybe he does, niggle at me sometimes, or put me down a little bit. But I'm 33 now, and I don't have that long left to have children, and I'm
Or
really
I have
lonely.
PMDD and they put up with me because I have
PMDD.
PMDD. What if, because
Yeah,
they'll use that. They'll
not a lot of
say,
people are going to accept
Ex
me.
who's and the partner will say that sometime. I've seen it on session. It was like, who else is going to put up with you? Like I put up with you and your PMDD.
Yeah,
No one else would go through this. So you might as well just
yeah,
stay with me. And I'm like,
yeah,
no.
yeah. And the biggest power, I have a lot of friends in their like 50s, 60s, and I went through a stage of time a while ago where I started not doing an actual survey, but going around and asking
Yeah.
all of my female friends who were older, what is the advice that you would give to young women? And every single one said, trust your gut when it comes to relationships.
Mm,
Trust your gut. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's like we don't do that, and then we stay in these relationships and we regret it. But really, our power as women comes from our boundaries. It comes because men will push, they'll and then we'll lose our self-respect in that place, and we have to stand in a place. And I don't want to say this in a way of like hating men. It's really not in that context. It's just in the context of self-preservation. We have to preserve ourselves, and we have to really look up, because as well as anything else, PMDD, pregnancy, motherhood, it all intertwines. It's all about the essence of being of womanhood, and womanhood's essence is our cyclicalness and our ability to be a mother and to be cyclical, and that is our own responsibility. As much as we would like it to be a man's responsibility, and maybe one day they'll take half of our responsibility, but fundamentally it is ours. And we need to protect it, because, and this is something I say to clients all the time, and it really needs to seep into our soul. You are important, and you are the only one that is going to look after yourself. So you have to really come into that space of like, going back to the initial thing of what we're saying, in this. If you're in a situation where you're dating someone and you're questioning if this, like, am I blowing it out of proportion? If you're questioning it, they probably are doing something that is out of context. Do you know what I mean?
Because
And yes,
why are
you
you asking yourself that question? If you have to stop and ask, then stop and ask why you have to stop and ask. There's
mm,
something in you that's like, this doesn't feel right.
yeah,
This
yeah,
is not right with me. And whether you have PMDD or not, whether you feel crazy or not, that feeling is there for a reason. You have that gift of discernment for a reason. That is a
mm,
gift that we have. And when you ignore it, it's ignoring the gift. You're not taking advantage of something that, because not everybody has that. And I think you need to trust it and at least explore it. That's what I would say. Like, I was really happy when the client at least reached out when they was not feeling right. Like, you need to, don't just hold it in because you're going to drive your, because it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to keep nudging you. That feeling is going to keep nudging you. And as you go further and further into that situation and you stay with that person, it's going to start feeling more and more uncomfortable for you. I've been in
mm,
that situation before where it's almost like you cannot find peace within that relationship or that interaction because it's not supposed to be there. It's not supposed to happen. And it's almost like you're not going to be allowed to experience peace, which is, I know, the biggest thing for us who have PMDD. And you may be wondering, like, you're dating someone, why can't I get peace? Why can't, like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with, no, what's wrong with the situation? Sometimes it's not something wrong with you because you have PMDD. It's something that your inner self is trying to tell you, get out of here. Danger, danger, danger. This is not good for us. Please walk away. And the
mm.
hardest, it's easy to stay. It's harder to walk away. It's really easy to go back to it and try to force yourself to ignore that gut feeling. Ignore it, but you're still gonna feel it.
Yeah, yeah. There's a few things in that. I think that one thing that also, this is also what I had to do a lot in my healing. It's like we have these blueprints. We have these blueprint relationships. And one of the things is that actually sometimes danger can feel like safety to people,
Mm,
especially when they've had a lot of that kind of past trauma from their childhood. It can really start to be like, well, this is my normal, and better the devil I know, kind of thing. So it's very hard,
yeah.
because it's like I can't help my attraction to people. I am attracted to this. And that can be a really, really challenging thing to overcome. And you really need to go into the deep wounds of that. But then the other side that you said there is, it's easier to stay and hard to leave. And that again goes back into that psyche of scarcity and need for love, and that real deep need for love. Because the truth is, and this was definitely the case for myself in the relationship with my ex-boyfriend, it was so painful being out of the relationship that it was easier
Hmm.
to be in the pain
Hmm.
of the relationship,
Yep.
because it was just so, it was too hard at that point. It's like I knew very early in that relationship I needed to leave, and I was always in that thing of I'm going, and I would come back, because what would happen is, and I'm sure many people can relate to this, is like, in the relationship I'm in pain, I'm confused. I know this is bad. I know this isn't good for me. I know this isn't God's best for me. But then when
Mhm.
I'm out of it, the pain of absence,
Mm.
pain of because yes, this person is bad and they're toxic, but they're giving me affection. They're holding me at night. We're together. We're bonded. I'm not alone anymore.
Yeah.
Even if it's toxic, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And I feel so desperately alone that now when I unbond myself, I'm back in a void. And that
Yeah.
pain, because as well, when you then first leave a relationship, you do go through love sickness. You go through
Hmm.
the physiological withdrawal of oxytocin, which in and of itself is really, really challenging. And
Yeah.
when you also have all of the emotions and the trauma bonds as well, it's so painful that you then go into that place again of like, okay, I'm leaving. You get brave, you leave, and then it starts coming. It gets worse.
Hmm.
It gets worse. You start pacing, like something happens and you're like, why have I left? And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you get to that point, I can't do it. And you go back. And this is why, they say even in a domestically abusive relationships, it takes 7 times for them to leave, because it we and I hope someone hears it that really needs to hear it. Like, we can go through these cycles and then we can feel bad about ourselves because we're like, I'm weak, I'm pathetic, how can I not do this? This is the prison. I'm just gonna have to say, because our souls, as you said, our souls always know. The
Yep.
deep core of your essence knows that it's wrong, because otherwise you'd be feeling peace, you know but you're not, you're
That's the
feeling confusion.
sign. I really want to highlight that. That's the sign because
Yeah.
I remember asking myself, how do I know that I'm supposed how do I know that I'm supposed to go? And
Mm,
then, if you think about even biblically, God is not a
yeah.
God of chaos and confusion. And I remember
No.
thinking, all I feel is chaos and confusion. Like that was my moral compass. That was my permission slip to walk away because I'm like, there's if Jesus is the Prince of Peace, there's no peace in this. This is not God's best for me. This is not what He has for me. And sometimes you can't even orchestrate peace. You try to like make yourself be at peace with certain things, and it's almost like it's not possible. And that feeling of withdrawal, the thing that we said earlier, because what a lot of what have happened with me, and also what I've seen with private clients is you go back and you apologize. You know that it wasn't you, but you go back and apologize just to get let back into more pain. And what I
Mm,
will say is for me, every time that I've done this in the past, it's only gotten worse. The
yeah.
next thing that happened got worse. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is even more painful than the last thing
Yeah.
that happened. And I remember thinking every single time, so it's kind of like that domestic situation where every single time, it takes 7 times. When they go back, they get abused even worse. Like it's not like the same level. And it's almost like, how much more are you willing to endure before you're
Mm,
willing to walk away and sit in it? My
yeah.
my business mentor calls it sitting in the dirty diaper. Nobody wants to do it. Everybody
Yeah.
wants to just pretend, and I just had to sit in the uncomfortability, the pain, the regret, the
Mm.
loss of the fantasy,
Well,
which
it's
is
the
the
pain, it's that pain of change, isn't it? It's the
yeah,
when the pain of change is not as bad as the pain of actually staying in the situation. You will change. And I think people need to really, if you're in that, saying that prayer and just being like, help me, whatever you are, universe, God, whatever, it
yeah,
doesn't matter.
yeah,
Doesn't matter,
yeah,
let's not get into that. If you're in them situations and you're in that debate in your head, just ask for help, and it will. You will, when something will just flip. And I really mean that, like, from real deep personal experience. And I've seen it with clients as well. I've seen it with many women, like being in domestic abuse centers and stuff as well. You get to a point where no, enough is enough. And so obviously, there are some really tragic stories of people that, things have got too far. And I think that one of the things that you're saying there is because what happens is you've submitted further down. They've seen, okay, she's going to come back again. And that's what happened
yeah,
with my ex-boyfriend a lot. It was like there was no respect at the end.
yeah,
He had no respect for me. I had no respect for myself. And that's, I think, because you could walk down the street and someone could be an asshole and they could have no respect for you. That doesn't really matter if anyone has respect for you. What matters is the lack of respect that has happened within you, that you've
Exactly.
lost it so much that going back to the subject again of like, you don't trust yourself anymore. You don't trust your capacity to put your boundaries up. You don't, you'll try and say, please don't do that, please don't do that, but then you'll do it, and I saw it with, I come from, like, my family home was a domestically abusive relationship as well, and I saw it time and time again with my mother, and my mum is a lovely woman, and we've had so many conversations about this since she's been out of this situation, but for such a long time it was like this cycle. It was this cycle of, he's going to change, he says he's going to change, he doesn't change, and it just goes round and round and round
Yeah.
again. And I think that for us with PMDD, because we have that Jekyll and Hyde kind of mentality inside of us, especially when we're, really early on in our kind of going through that healing process, we don't trust, outside of a relationship, we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust our emotions. We feel, irregardless of anyone else, we feel unsafe in ourselves
Yeah.
because we don't know, we feel like we're just tossing about the wind. So it can make us quite vulnerable to them kind of situations. And this is where, us, going through this, like, dating with PMDD, a huge part of it is putting that space of self-preservation in, building a sense of self-trust, because that self-trust is so important. That self-preservation is so important. Your emotions, and if nothing else, your emotions are valid, all of them. All of them are valid. They might be blown out of proportion. They might feel out of context, but normally they're coming from a trigger and a trauma. They're coming from some sort of past experience that hasn't been resolved, an emotional echo, and we need to move through them. But fundamentally, if you're not feeling safe in a relationship, if this relationship is triggering the life out of you, if this dating context is doing that, get out of it.
Yeah.
Your peace is more important, and the person that you're meant to be with, it's not saying that everything's going to be sunshine and roses, but even in pain we can have peace, because
Hmm.
when you talk about like, God is, as you said there, God is a God of peace and not a God of confusion. And I think that also there is that sense of, if something makes me feel good, then it's good. But it's like, you can be in a good relationship and have tough times and
Yeah.
still feel peace in the kind of context of the argument, because there's no confusion in it. And what we're really talking about here is that putting a spell on you, being manipulated, being gaslit,
Mm.
undermining how you feel. If someone's undermining how you feel when you start dating, no, I'm
Because they're
sorry,
going to continue, because they're going to continue.
they're going to
Because what
continue.
you see is what they have the capacity to bring. It's all about, it's like a tube of toothpaste. I heard someone say once, like, when you squeeze the tube of toothpaste, everything that comes out is what was within that person. So if you
Yeah,
see that action come out, you know what they're capable of, you know what their go-to is. Don't ignore that. So we're specifically talking about dating. When you're dating and you're trying to find out, is this a partner for me? Can this be my PMDD partner? These are the things. And so that's why a lot of what's going on in this episode is warning signs to get you to pivot in your
yeah,
PMDD in a way that's not going to put you in a situation to where you're harming yourself by staying in something that is not going to be good for you. So when I talk about the PMDD monthly breakups, this is not what I mean. I don't mean like if you're in a
no,
relationship with an actual good person and you're just going through, issues because of PMDD, or you're going through trauma or things like that. I'm talking about when you're dating and you're trying to navigate finding a person that's good for you and your
yeah.
PMDD. These are things that you really need to look out for, and don't
Mm.
waste your time trying to paint the red flags green.
Yeah, and this is why, in the dating with PMDD, like, the WhatsApp group, for having that support. This is why things like these are so important, because I think for a lot of us, we can feel very isolated in PMDD anyway, and with our mental health. But I think when it comes to these things, we do need, so it doesn't necessarily need to be this, but if this doesn't feel the call for you, then it is about finding safe people outside of it, because you need to be able to have people that you can bounce, as Rose said earlier on, if you're having them moments where you're like, I feel like I'm blowing this out of proportion, because sometimes with PMDD, we do have such
Mm-hmm.
expressive emotions that we don't trust ourselves. We need people that we can trust to be our blind spot mirror reflection, so that we can actually calm ourselves down and really hash things out properly and be like, okay, outside of that, because we want to be in safe relationships. We want to feel safe. We want to move through it in a proper way. And we also don't want all of our we don't want to that our emotions get the better of us in that as
Yeah.
well, because there are, let's also be honest as well and say that there are some times, and I've definitely had that, where I have blown things out of proportion in a way that's like, yeah, this is probably a 2 and I've gone to a 10, and probably this person is actually a good person, that, and I read this wrong because I tarred them with an old brush.
Yeah.
And if you've been through really bad, if you've been through abusive relationships, if you've been through narcissistic relationships, it can be hard to go into a new relationship with a lens that this person is actually a safe person and they're not trying to harm me. So I think, again, having people that you can speak to, that you can hash things out with, is important, because you want to come in this with fresh eyes. And I think you said it before, I don't know if it was before the podcast yesterday, of like, don't spill don't spill
Oh,
old
don't bleed. Don't bleed on
yeah.
people that didn't cut you. You like, don't
Don't spill
spill
no
blood.
blood like a vampire.
Oh
Just have a glass of blood next to. Speaking about vampire and witches, I don't know what it says about me. It's not what I look at all the time, I swear.
Don't bleed on people that didn't cut you.
Don't, that's the one. That is the one.
Don't take your cup of blood and pour it.
Just drink it, Layla.
But yeah, so we're going to be talking about this in the Dating with PMDD program. So if you've not signed up, the link is going to be in the show notes, or you can go with inlovewithpmdd.com and sign up. But until next time, we got this.
We've got this.
I hope this PMDD episode helped you and your partner in your struggles within your relationship. And if this is something that you know that you need help with and you need further support, individualized support, make sure you're going to inlovewithpmdd.com and you're getting those private sessions to really work through what you're going through in your relationship, specifically in regards to PMDD. And also, I want you to leave a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. What this does is it helps other PMDD sufferers and partners find this show that can help them get these free PMDD relationship tools. I remember what it felt like to not know that there were tools out there specifically for PMDD relationships. So I want to make sure that you are sharing these tools with others, share them on your social media, share them with people that you know that are also struggling in their PMDD relationships. Until next episode, this is Dr. Rose, your PMDD relationship psychotraumatologist. One more thing, I almost forgot. I now have the Fresh Start PMDD Partners Workbook. What this workbook can do is, if you've had past traumatic experiences with your partner, past fights, past arguments, and they keep coming up every single month in PMDD, I created a Fresh Start Workbook so that you can deal with all of the traumatic experiences that have happened in the past in PMDD rage and all of these things, so you can stop going through the same cycle again and again and again. So get that workbook. It comes with a video episode of the actual podcast that I recorded on getting a fresh start in your PMDD relationship, so you're not continuing the same cycle again and again and again. So make sure that you get that workbook. And if you need those individualized counseling sessions, you know where to go, inlovewithpmdd.com. Until next time, we got this. Love you.